Now that we have a quorum, we will start our meeting. Do you have anything, Mr. City Manager, for meeting follow-up?
I do not, Your Honor. Thank you.
Does anybody here have anything for meeting follow-up? Next thing would be the transit fare study.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor. Good to see you this evening. We have the opportunity to hear an update with regard to this study that we've given you a heads up for in the past. Ms. Andrus is here with her consultants to walk us through this status update, if you will. And if it pleases the council, I'd like to turn time over to Beth.
Hello, Mayor, Council. So the Casper Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, through their Unified Planning Work Program, did a transit fare study for the city of Casper. So we have gone through most of the process, did a citizen survey, and we're here with Nelson Nygaard, Peter Soderberg, who I'm going to turn it over here in a second to present the results of that. Once council has seen that, we'll take your input. Then we will do this report out for the public for public comment. We are not asking you to change the fare or make any vote or anything currently about the fare. If transit likes the fare study and the suggested option, they will come forward themselves with a resolution for a fare change. I just want to be very clear about that. We are not making any decisions on changing any fares tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Soderberg, Peter, with Nelson Nygaard to walk you guys through what we did and the findings of that study.
All right, thanks a lot. Good evening. Thank you all for allowing me to join you for this presentation today. Again, my name is Peter Soderberg. I'm a senior associate at Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates, a transportation planning firm with offices all across the country. I'm based in our Seattle office, and I am the project manager for the Casper Area Transit 2024 fare study. So we do have a brief agenda just to walk through a few key highlights from the project. We'll start by going through some project background, really identifying what a fare study is, why we're looking at doing this fare study for Casper Area Transit, as well as identifying some of the specific project goals and objectives we developed at the onset of this project. We'll review some key findings from our existing conditions evaluation, including some findings on the existing fare structure, as well as how the fare is performing for the agency, as well as a review of similarly sized peer agencies and what their fare structures can tell us about best practices within the industry. We'll highlight some of our efforts for community engagement before we delve into some of the findings from our technical evaluation on the actual potential fare structure changes, before we end on our actual recommendations and open it up to questions from all of you. So moving right along into our project background section, what is a fare study? So this 2024 fare study really accomplishes a few key things. First, it's a comprehensive review of Casper Area Transit's existing fare policies, as well as their performance. So not just what is the fare structure, but how well is it working for Casper? It's a comparison of other peer agencies, so we can see where there's similarities between what Casper is doing and what other agencies are doing, as well as where there's key differences and what opportunities we can learn from those differences. It represents an opportunity to engage with the community and understand what their priorities are for their fare structure moving forward. And finally, it represents an analysis to anticipate potential impacts of any given fare change, both to ridership and revenue, so we can fully understand what it means for Casper Area Transit if the fare structure were to change. Which begs the question, why are we looking at doing a fare study right now? And there's a few reasons. So first, since assuming transit operations in 2021, this is really the city's first opportunity to take a comprehensive review of the fare structure, policies, and performance. This is generally considered a best practice within the transit industry for systems to do every few years, particularly post-COVID, as ridership demographics and travel patterns have changed somewhat drastically over the last 4 years, really giving us a chance to evaluate how folks are using the system, how they're paying fares, and how that can be updated to better reflect their ongoing needs. Lastly, the Casper Area MPO does designate a portion of their budget to fund transit projects like this fare study. So early on in the project, when we had our initial kickoff back at the beginning of the year, we sat down with city and MPO staff and really highlighted a few key project goals and objectives to help guide this effort over the coming months. So first and foremost, we identified a goal of working collaboratively with city and MPO staff. We recognize that when we work cooperatively and with each other, we generally create a much stronger product at the end rather than kind of working in isolated silos. So every step of the way, we're having repeated and open communication with everyone involved in the project and ensuring that we receive open input from all areas. Next, we wanted to focus on improving data collection and reporting for the city, knowing that there can be some significant administrative burdens associated with that, and any changes that we can implement to the fare structure that can improve that collection and reporting would greatly benefit the city. Next, there were a few specific areas we wanted to delve into in our analysis. First, specifically identifying potential impacts of zero fare service, as well as some specific reduced fare programs, which is something that has been gaining a lot of momentum around the country. So truly understanding what it would mean for the agency to approach or address any of those specific programs. And lastly, making sure that any fare structure recommendations we develop are targeted to both reduce the administrative burden to city staff, as well as simplify the fare paying experience, both in terms of riders actually paying their fare to board the bus and for bus operators when they collect the fare from passengers as they board. So all of that represents a high-level overview of the project background. And from here, we'll jump right into our actual existing conditions evaluation, what we looked at as a part of that, and what some of our key findings were. So the first step of this is really understanding what the existing fare structure looks like for Casper area transit. So at its core, there's really two key services: Link, the fixed route service, and Assist, the demand response service, that each have their own fare structures. So starting with Link fixed route service, the base fare is $1 for a single trip with a few different discount policies. First, there is a 50% reduced fare for seniors and people with disabilities. This is something that is required by the FTA. There's also a 25% discount for students. That's something that's not required. And there are several monthly pass options available that are priced at about 30 times the single trip fare. So that's $30 a month for the full fare, $15 for that reduced fare category, and $25 a month for the student discount. There's also policy for free transfers using tokens, as well as a low-income subsidized fare program in which qualifying riders can apply for the program and receive a set number of tokens per month that allow them to access the service for free. Moving on to the Assist service, this is really a demand response, a door-to-door type service that offers a few different fares. First, for anyone who has a qualifying disability, they're able to ride Assist service for a $2 fare. This service is also open to the general public who do not have a qualifying disability, but at a premium of $5. And lastly, the same low-income subsidized program does apply to Assist, though the token distribution varies slightly from the Link service. So once we understand the existing fare structure, the next step is really to understand how that structure is working for Casper area transit. And what we found is that, generally speaking, the ridership, so the number of people who are using each pass product and the amount of revenue that's generated by that pass product, really varies significantly throughout the service. So first, we found that nearly half of Link trips use the low-income subsidized fare program. So about 45% of all trips are made by folks using that program. And about 18% of trips include a transfer. So both of those categories don't generate any fare box revenue since they're using that token-based system. On the other hand, we found that single trips that pay that full $1 fare only account for about 14% of trips made on the system, but they generate about 48% of the revenue. Again, because so much of the ridership is using that low-income subsidized program that does not collect fares. The last finding we had is that monthly passes are generally underutilized. They only account for about 10% of all trips, including the full fare monthly pass, the reduced monthly pass, and the student monthly pass. And what that tells us is that that pass product might be priced slightly higher than the market would indicate, since folks aren't using it as much. That means that they may not be riding as frequently as they need to really make the math pencil out and pay for itself after a certain amount of time. So we did a similar evaluation for Assist service and found that things are slightly less complicated since there are fewer fare options available. Generally, we found that there's lower subsidized ridership on Assist service than Link, only about 25% of riders participating in that program. The vast majority of trips, somewhere around 73%, are using that ADA full fare single trip. So that's that $2 fare for qualifying disability riders. The $5 premium fare that's open for the general public, very low ridership, only around 2%. Again, that's likely in part because of that $5 premium fare. So folks have less expensive options to get around. They're less likely to use this service as a member of the general public. Next, moving beyond kind of how the fare structure is performing for Casper, we wanted to broaden our evaluation, bring in a few key peer agency examples and see what are they doing in terms of their fare pricing? How are things similar? How are things different? What lessons can we learn from them? So we sat down with our project team, members of the city and NPO staff, and identified 6 agencies that we could look at as part of the peer analysis, including Cheyenne Transit in Cheyenne, Goose Creek Transit in Sheridan County, Met Transit in Billings, Montana, Star Transit in Rock Springs, Start Bus over in Jackson, and WRTA in Fremont County. So all these agencies represent somewhat different sizes, different levels of operation, but do all represent the same general geographic area as Casper. We do have different aspects that we can learn from them. So this table here shows the kind of base level fare structure for each of those agencies, including what they charge for their fixed route service, as well as their paratransit or general public demand response service. And generally what we found is that Casper Area Transit is in line with peer agencies, but on the lower end of the spectrum. So only charging $1 for fixed route service. We see Cheyenne Area Transit recently went fare free, but Goose Creek Transit, Met Transit, and WRTA all charge $2 for a single trip. Star Transit also charges $1. And Start Bus in Jackson has a somewhat complicated fare structure that has many of their trips operating fare free, but they also have distance-based fares for longer distance trips. So not really a strict dollar fare amount for their service, a little bit more complicated. And we see a similar story for the paratransit service, $2 compared to up to $5.50 in Goose Creek and $3.50 for Met Transit. So again, in line with peer agencies, but a bit on the lower side, meaning there may be some opportunities to increase fares. So our next step beyond what people are actually charging for their service is to look at how fares are actually performing for the agency. So we look at a couple of different metrics to help us understand this. The first of which is fare box recovery, which is effectively a measure of what % of the transit system's operating costs are paid for by fares. So in the case of Casper Area Transit, fare box recovery is generally consistent with peers. Casper is around 4%. The peers kind of range from 2% to 8%, and then WRTA is appearing all the way up at 19%. There's a little bit of nuance here. Sometimes agencies will report contract revenue or other alternative revenue sources that tend to inflate fare box recovery. So kind of treating WRTA as a bit of an outlier in this case. The next metric that we look at is average fare per boarding. So this is, accounting for all the different pass products. People aren't always paying the full $1 fare to board link, for example. People may be using discounted fares or pass products that lower the average fare paid. And what we see is that translates to Casper Area Transit collecting on average 66 cents per boarding across all services. So this is generally below the peer agency averages that we're seeing. So, including WRTA, which again has that somewhat inflated number, we're seeing $2.06 as that peer agency average. Removing that, we're left with 89 cents per boarding for the remaining agencies. So Casper is still a little bit below that. Again, this indicates to us that some fare structure changes may have the opportunity to improve both of these efficiency metrics and make service a bit more cost effective. So again, just to highlight some of our key findings from the existing conditions evaluation, a large portion of riders, particularly on Link, are currently riding fare free through that subsidized program. Monthly passes appear to be somewhat underutilized. Again, this may be based on changes in ridership patterns following the pandemic, that people aren't riding transit as frequently as they were. So paying a full $30 a month may not pencil out like it used to. We're also seeing that Link and Assist fares are consistent with peer agencies, but again, on the low end of that spectrum. And there may be an opportunity to improve fare box recovery and fare per boarding through some fare structure changes. So with that highlighting the existing conditions evaluation, next we want to walk through our approach and some initial findings for community engagement. So similar to the overall project goals, we sat down with the team and developed several goals for engagement to help guide our efforts here. First of which was to spread awareness of the fare study throughout the community, just to let folks know that this is something we're taking a look at. We don't know what the recommendations are going to be at this stage, but want them to know that this is something we're considering and that they have the opportunity to get involved. We specifically want to understand the perceptions of the existing fare structure and policies. Do people find it clear and easy to understand, or are there some aspects that are confusing we could look at simplifying? We also want to evaluate the interest and priorities of potential fare structure changes. So if things do change, can we make sure that they stay in line with what the public wants to see? And lastly, we want to target both current transit riders and non-riders to make sure that we can reach as broad a base within the community as possible, but still understand those separate priorities between each of those groups. So for our specific engagement approach, we developed an online survey that was available for just over a month from April 1st through May 6th. And we advertised the survey through a few different methods. First, we developed some social media content that was posted through the Casper Area NPO's Facebook page. An image of that post is available here on the right. We also developed several flyers that were posted on board all of the vehicles, as well as distributed at several locations throughout the city that included some project background information, as well as a QR code and a link that led directly to the survey. So again, this is in the hopes of getting folks who are actually on board the vehicles to see the flyer, scan the code, take the survey, as well as those who may not ride transit but may see the Facebook post or engage with those flyers at other buildings throughout the city. We also offered a free monthly bus pass as a part of a raffle prize as an incentive to help encourage more folks to take the survey. So, unfortunately, despite those efforts, relatively low turnout for the survey. I think this is not particularly uncommon for fare studies, particularly as there's not a recommendation to react to in the study. We're really looking at what folks think of the current fare structure and what priorities they may have moving forward. So we find that there's generally more turnout when there's something to react to, but we did have some kind of preliminary key findings from this survey. We found that folks generally think Casper Area Transit is a good value for the fare. So right now, again, on the lower side of the spectrum for peer agencies at $1. So folks find that to be a good value. Respondents generally feel that their options to pay for transit are clear. There's only a handful of discount programs, nothing too complicated. And generally, when asked why respondents don't use the monthly pass, we found that they typically don't ride enough to justify the cost. So again, that kind of reiterates our point that there may be an opportunity to adjust that price to better align with what folks want to see. So from here, we kind of used all of that initial input from our project goals, from our existing conditions and peer review findings, and from our public engagement to develop our fare evaluation process. So there's a couple of different components of this. First, we use a fare model to project anticipated changes to ridership and revenue for any potential fare structure. So effectively, for each of those initial fare categories that I mentioned, so all of the different single trips, discount programs, monthly pass programs, we evaluate specific changes to those prices, and the model, using some peer industry informed elasticity factors, will help us identify how ridership will change corresponding to that fare change and how revenue will change as well. So generally, ridership is considered elastic relative to fares. So as fares increase, ridership decreases, and vice versa. As fares decrease, ridership increases. So this really forms the kind of backbone of the quantitative output for our evaluation methodology. After developing that methodology, we sat down with staff again and developed several preliminary fare scenarios that help us test some specific fare changes. So ultimately, we're looking at seeing how some of these individual changes will impact ridership and revenue, and then taking some of the strongest aspects of those preliminary scenarios, carrying them forward into the preferred alternative and ultimately the recommendations. So some things that we looked at as a part of these preliminary fare scenarios were maximizing revenue, so something that involves increasing the fare to a point that ridership generally drops pretty significantly, but generates maximum revenue for the agency. We look at making some adjustments to the subsidized fare program, as well as general increases and decreases to the base fare. And lastly, looking at a fare-free evaluation, which does require some additional analysis that I'll walk through next, just to make sure there's a full understanding of those impacts as well. So while the fare model is used to test some specific fare changes, there's really more complicated factors involved in a full fare-free evaluation. So some of those factors include looking at increases to ridership. So as a result of eliminating fares, we anticipate increases to both fixed route and paratransit ridership. There's obviously a significant impact on revenue, as no fare box revenue would be collected as a result of removing fares. There's also impacts to operating costs. So first, the agency does have a cost associated with collecting fares. There's administrative labor and maintenance labor that goes into reconciling cash, counting cash, cleaning tokens, maintaining fare boxes, purchasing past products, things like that. There's also some potential additional operating costs related to increased paratransit demand that we'll discuss in more detail shortly. And lastly, there are a few policy considerations around perceptions of safety once fares are removed, addressing destination-less riders, so folks boarding the bus and riding around without having a destination where they actually alight the bus, as well as identifying some potential alternative funding sources to backfill that foregone fare box revenue. So jumping right into the evaluation, so this is again just for the fare-free evaluation. On the ridership side, we see that we anticipate link and assist ridership to increase after going fare-free. On the link side, we see that increase anywhere between 22 and 33% of existing ridership, and about a 15 to 30% increase on the assist side. So in total, we'd be looking at anywhere between 38,000 and 58,000 additional trips per year. It's also important to note that this evaluation assumes no change in existing ridership patterns for current subsidized riders. Since they currently receive their tokens fare-free, we assume that they would not have an increased likelihood of riding with the removal of other fares. They're effectively already riding fare-free, so this change would apply to the other riders on the system. So on the cost side, we see that there are some potential paratransit implications. So as ridership increases, demand for service increases, and under the ADA, 100% of paratransit demand must be met. So generally, as ridership increases, it's likely that there will be additional assist service required to maintain pace with that demand. So what we found in our evaluation is that right now it requires a little under half of a revenue hour to serve one trip on paratransit service. So assuming that same level of service today, to meet that additional ridership would require somewhere between 2,100 and 4,200 additional revenue hours. And with current costs at about $84 per revenue hour, we anticipate an increase in costs of somewhere between $177,000 and $355,000 per year as a result of going fare-free. So again, as demand for service increases, as fares are removed, additional service is required to meet that demand, and there's a cost associated with providing that service. So this kind of wraps up all of the holistic costs and revenue associated with this potential change. So looking over at the table on the right, we see on the link side, there'd be $46,000 in current fare box revenue that would no longer be collected. So that's kind of a loss of revenue. There's no additional operating costs associated with link service. Over on the assist side, there's an additional $43,000 in fare box revenue that would not be generated. And we have a range of that increased operating cost, again, between $177,000 and $355,000, somewhere within that range. And lastly, there's that cost of fare collection. So again, this is kind of the administrative labor, maintenance, kind of parts acquisition costs that would no longer be applied to the agency. So that is cost savings of $38,000 per year. And when you wrap all of that up, we see an estimated increase to operating costs between $228,000 and $406,000 per year. So this represents about a 9% to 16% increase in operating costs over 2022 levels. So while there are some potential alternative funding strategies that may be available, generally this increase in operating costs appears to be prohibitive. And after some conversations with staff, we determined that this may not be the right approach at this time for Casper Area Transit. So this was not moved forward as the preferred alternative due to that significant increase in operating costs. So next, we do want to move on to discuss our actual recommendations and what emerged from our preferred alternative development process. So the preferred alternative fare structure shown in the table on the right, any number identified in red is a change to the existing fare structure. The existing structure, which is shown in the far right column under existing. So just a few highlights from this preferred alternative. First is a 25-cent increase to the link fare. So this again is still within alignment with peer agencies, moving slightly up that spectrum closer to the $2 mark, but not jumping up so high that riders will feel a very significant impact moving all the way to $2. We would have unchanged fares for reduced fares. So seniors, people with disabilities that are currently paying that 50-cent fare, they would see no increase in their fares. Similarly, the monthly pass would continue to be priced at $30. So since we know that generally folks aren't riding enough to make a 30 times multiplier pencil out for them, keeping the price the same but raising the base fare changes that multiplier to 24 times, meaning folks only need to take 24 one-way trips to make that monthly pass pencil. So that may start working better for some folks. Lastly, we're looking at simplifying some of the reduced fare programs. So right now we have the seniors and people with disabilities fare that's at 50 cents, the student fare at 75 cents, and the subsidized program that allows folks to ride for free after receiving their tokens from the agency. And instead of having several different fare discounts, we're looking at creating one combined reduced program. So people with disabilities, seniors, students, and low-income folks would all be able to access the service for 50 cents per trip. So effectively, they all kind of join into that same reduced fare program. Students get a slight discount from where they're at today. Subsidized fares for the low-income folks get a slight increase from free to 50 cents, but still within that very affordable reduced range that's offered for seniors and people with disability. And this really simplifies the fare structure for riders as well as the agency and reduces administrative costs to the city associated with collecting those fares. Lastly, on the assist side, we look at increasing assist fares by 50 cents. So this is consistent with FTA standards. Most agencies will charge 2 times the fixed route fare for the paratransit service. So as you move from $1 to $1.25, we also recommend moving from $2 to $2.50. And again, as we're removing the subsidized fare program, those folks would pay the full ADA fare of $2.50, effectively removing that category from assist service and maintaining the $5 premium fare for the general public to use the service. So we have that fare structure in mind. What are the actual impacts of the fare structure? So as we're raising fares, we do see a decrease in ridership due to those higher fares, about 30,000 fewer trips per year, or about 17% less ridership than we have today. But as a result, we see higher fares generate more revenue. So there's about 51,000 additional dollars per year, or 39% increase in fare box revenue. And importantly, we want to note that seniors, people with disability, students, and monthly pass users would see either a reduced rate from what they're paying today, or they would see no fare increase at all, which really reduces some of that potential ridership loss associated with this fare change. So also want to kind of discuss implementation and next steps, really where we go from here. So as Beth mentioned up at the front of this presentation, these recommendations represent study findings, not an official adoption. I believe the plan is for the final plan to be presented to council for review again next month. And following that adoption there, steps for implementation would include Casper Area Transit getting communications and engagement with funding partners about this potential change, creating a rate resolution that would then go forward for council approval, an official public comment period on the resolution of the council meeting, and then ultimately seeking approval and implementation of the new fare structure. So I know there's a fair amount of details in there, but that does conclude my presentation. So if there's any questions, happy to answer them now.
Kyle?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Peter, for all the information. You referred to bus tokens occasionally throughout the presentation. My understanding is that we recently transitioned from bus tokens to an alternative form of some sort of pass or something. And so it sounds like this study did not capture that transition, any metrics, any change in metrics in regards to bus usage as after that transition. Is all the research you did, was it all pre-bus pass transition?
So yes and no. We were aware of the transition to the kind of QR code based scanning pass program. Unfortunately, all the ridership data that we have available is before that implementation took effect. So for all of our quantitative analysis, it is based on when the tokens were fully in effect. Our final report does include a fare technology piece where we do fully evaluate the pros and cons, the trade-offs associated with those pass changes. However, as we do need to base this in existing ridership data, that did have to come from a period before that implementation took place.
Thank you. Follow-up question for Liz, if you don't mind. Thank you. I have had some folks that work for social service providers reach out to me and let me know that they've had some growing pains related to the QR code transition, and so I was just curious, it doesn't have to be tonight, but maybe when this comes in front of us with a recommendation from the transit department about what change, if any, we should make, do you mind providing an update again, either now or at that time, about how that transition's gone and if there are issues that we're currently working through with some of those folks as it relates to the transition? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, our transit manager, Caden, was not able to join us this evening, and I do want you all to have a chance to meet him. So we do want to get onto the docket now, a presentation about the PASS program. We most recently did a rollout with the Collective Trust and the SIM group to other agencies about the PASS program. And I think a lot of the growing pains have now been answered. And it's a very user-friendly plan for all of this. And I think you all need to hear that for the agencies that you serve on. And again, it's going to be a real, I hate to use the word game changer because it's so cliche now, but for our transit operation, this moving to this PASS program, both for Assist and Link, is going to be tremendous. They're truly bringing us forward into being solid transit operators. And again, with the recommendations that we've worked through with Peter, that we have talked all along about what this would mean with the ePass program. But we will be happy to get that presentation onto the docket. And as Beth alluded to before the presentation, we need to do this same update to our transit partners, being Mills, Evansville, and the county, so that they are aware, because it will affect them. So we wanted you all to see it first this evening, and then we plan to kind of go on the road with some of the recommendations that have come from this fair study, which again is a requirement, as Peter kicked off with, for any operator of a transit operation. And we've kept it flat for the last 3 years, which had been our commitment, but I do see some opportunity to consider a slight increase in the fare going forward. So I've kind of bounced around from just the PASS program to just some of the behind the scenes, as really our entire transit team has been involved with our consultants. So they're not all here tonight from our 4th Street facility, but they have been instrumental in providing a lot of the data and working through this, understanding who our ridership is. But you will see more of it, council.
Thank you.
Guy, did you have any questions or comments?
I don't at this point. Thanks though, Steve.
You bet. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. Have a great night.
You bet. Since we just got information about the public health report and things, and there was nothing in our packet, we will go ahead and be skipping the health department funding request so that we can have time to study further information. Is that an appropriate?
Please, Mr. Mayor, and I'm not even sure what you have in your stack there. So
Yeah.
I don't.
The parent handbook, and check out some of the other resources we have available.
I do not like to blindside the council with an issue when they haven't been adequately prepared with information. I wasn't even aware of that information coming forward. So can we have another opportunity to visit about this?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. And I'm sorry about that.
Nope, we're good. So yes, that works. So next is the 6 cent potential project and cost list discussion. Thank you, Liz and your team. Did you want to kick this off, Mr. City Manager?
If it's okay with you, Your Honor?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. The opportunity, of course, that council has to consider at this juncture is with regard to your support of a 6 cent for Casper voters. I got the direction, let's see, a couple of weeks back now, when we delivered the budget to you, that indeed you at least provisionally had that interest as a group. to evaluate this and consider this and visit with the county commissioners along these lines. Without a doubt, the county commissioners are including you on their agenda next week at 2:40, at which point council can simply pose the question of whether or not the ballot can be made available for the city of Casper to occupy for a question to Casper voters. And I'm being emphatic about that because this is a very different approach than what we've had in the past. Which is typically, historically, the question has always been a countywide proposal for countywide voters. And in this circumstance, we're talking about a citywide proposal for Casper voters only. And therefore you know, as the mayor and as the council, certainly are the best to propose this question to the commissioners with regard to, you know, whether or not this could or should proceed. Part of the deliberation that ultimately needs to take place is with regard to the specific language on the ballot that would go forward to the voters in Casper. And as you can see in the memo pertaining to the topic, no doubt you have seen what it is that we would offer by way of initial ideas that could constitute a menu on the ballot for Casper voters to consider. And that means that each of the projects, whichever ones end up on the ballot, would essentially have a yes/no component to determine whether or not the voters would support them for each project for a 6-cent support. The idea is for tonight is to give you an initial opportunity to consider what it is that we have here. The opportunity to ask us to do some more homework in the event there'd be something else you'd like to see from a provisional basis to look into. And then finally, any other questions that you may have about process or with respect to the attorney's understanding of the statute. Any other questions that may help you as we potentially and ostensibly prepare for the visit with the commissioners next week. To be clear, the only thing we're asking of the commissioners is essentially yes or no as it relates to occupying the ballot for Casper voters. Not really whether or not they agree with a list or whether they agree to implement a tax. All of that is the wrong context. It's simply whether or not the voters should be allowed to consider this possibility. And so with that table setting, Your Honor, we would go whatever direction you'd like to see this discussion take tonight.
So I want to make sure I fully understand it, and I hope everybody else did. But basically, we're not going to spend our time trying to sort out what we're going to put on the ballot right now because we haven't got a yes from the commission. So saving our time. So if they say yes next week, then we would go ahead and work our way through the list of potential alternatives.
And Mr. Mayor, to add to that point, which is all correct, we are learning that the turnaround with regard to a potential green light next week needs to be pretty quick. Because it sounds like the deadline that we have on our horizon is July 18th to submit language to the county clerk, who then prepares it for the ballot and so on. And so looking at this list and evaluating whether or not it's a relatively complete set of ideas would help. Because if there is homework that we need to do and research that we need to do for other ideas that you'd like to see, for the time that would be appropriate for you to make a final determination about language to submit to the clerk, we don't want to waste any time beyond, I would say, the 25th of June, which is your next work session, in the event that we get a green light next week.
I would think that we probably, personal opinion again, so if anybody else has anything, I would think that we could go ahead and have that on the agenda for the 25th. If we get a yes on the 18th, I believe the thing that I know I would personally like to see, and I would hope everybody else would too, is some kind of a rough cost estimate on what these things are, because all we have is a $35 million budget, basically. So we need to figure out that, and then maybe if, you know, if these fail, then these would be our backup one, backup two. I don't know whether we can even do that or not. But basically, that's, I think we need to set up a budget on this that would accomplish the 35 or close to it.
Mr. Mayor, again, a very fair point. You will not see a list again without numbers. Now, granted, this list wasn't totally ready for that, obviously, but the next time we visit on the 25th, assuming a green light is rendered, that list will be complete with cost estimates, so you have a feel for what that looks like.
Looks like, Amber, you have a question.
Great. Not so much a question other than, I'll just say, I think that this project list is shaping up to be, to look like it attends to many of the things that I've heard about. The only one that I think maybe should get added. And if there's a suite of projects at Washington Park that are also, that are going to be underway soon, that we have some funding for a variety of, Chucklin Carter. We've got some funding already secured, and I think that park has broad support in the community. Many people use it because it's kind of in the heart of the community, and so I think that one should get thrown in consideration alongside all the rest of these as well.
Any other? Oh, thank you. I was gonna get to Jai. Go ahead, Jai.
Thanks. Just a quick question. I'm just looking at the list here and I agree. I think it looks good and I would support adding those projects at Washington Park. I just noticed that the Ford Wyoming Center is specifically related to the design. I wondered if we could get just a little bit of background. I mean, I know we're limited in the amount of funds we'll be able to access over this 2-year time frame. So is it just for that reason why we would include the design, or is there another reason why we wouldn't include some components at least of the actual renovation? Or maybe it's just because it takes that much time to get the design. I'm just curious for a little more context there, please.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor, thank you for that question. The short answer is you are correct. The design is really critical for us to understand the appropriate scope for the actual renovations, depending on whatever direction council would like to see that take. And obviously public input that would help drive that as well, and so on. My suggestion would be it's a little early to understand what construction costs would include, unless you need anything else. Is that accurate? Okay.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up if I could.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I guess, and I think, I know we're not really meant to go into it here, but if we could have a sense of, and I think you just committed to this, but a sense of what that might cost. I guess I'm just thinking, from a taxpayer perspective, it's less exciting to think about this additional money going to a design that may or may not happen versus, a project that we're kind of behind from a policy standpoint. So I don't know if what I just said makes sense, but it just, I guess I'm just think we might want to consider how we approach that specific project once we know a little bit more about what the design itself might cost.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor, we recognize that a number of these ideas may not necessarily be ready for prime time, but are included because we certainly heard some feedback that there may be some interest to see some of these ideas rise to the level of being included on the ballot, potentially. So, you may be totally right that the Fort Wyoming Center design, it may be one of those ideas that aren't ready for prime time quite yet.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
I have a question about the 911 emergency dispatch center. I thought that we had ample room at the CBC building or whatever, that they were gonna be like on the 4th floor or something of that nature. So has that changed?
Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, no, that has not changed. The idea is that indeed, this segment of the project is critical enough. And certainly we've heard some support from some of you that suggest helping the police department project would be a meaningful consideration, to the extent that we thought if indeed this were something that council wanted to get behind for the ballot, this would be a very meaningful way to get that final project across the finish line.
Okay.
Again,
So
if
it's
you
not
thought
a
it's
different
appropriate to
facility,
include
it's in the same building, but just trying to make that for the dispatch.
that. Absolutely.
Got it.
And actually be on the 8th floor,
Right, okay.
should have moved forward.
Councilor Gamroth. Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I was hoping for, I mean, it sounds like you're just looking for direction to go in front of the county and ask if we're able to do it in the first place. So I'm looking forward to talking about the projects individually, at a later time, should we get that approval. One of the things I'd like clarification on in the meantime, though, is I'm sitting here trying to do some homework on Cheyenne Sixpenny, and I don't see anything in any of their literature or Q&A about a 2-year. So I guess I'd be curious to know if there's a difference between a county sixpenny and a municipal sixpenny, if those statutes read differently. And I see Carter shaking his head, so I probably already got the answer I need, but I was hoping for clarification in that regard, because Cheyenne put all their projects on a ballot, and the language that they use is it will stay in place until all those projects are fully funded. And so that doesn't have to happen tonight, but if you're prepared, Eric.
Yeah, Mayor, Counselor.
I think Mr. City Attorney has that answer.
Yeah, I am certainly prepared to answer that. You're correct, in Cheyenne, that is a countywide specific use tax, and the statute reads very clearly that the tax is collected until the amount for the project is collected. Under the new statute that allows a citywide tax, there's a couple of different ways you can proceed forward. And under the statute, if a county has already enacted a general purpose 5 cent and a specific use 6 cent, the municipality can put the ballot question to its citizens as of right, without the necessity to seek county commission approval. Since we have not enacted both of those, subsection G requires the municipality to go to the county commissioners and seek a resolution that would allow us to place that on the ballot. And that subsection G contains the further limitation that any tax enacted pursuant to that mechanism is limited to 2 years. So it's interesting because in the first part of it, if we didn't have to get the county resolution, then we would have the ability to enact a tax that would go until the project was paid. But because of that subsection G, we're limited to 2 years. And it's a little bit wonky because they just kind of, the legislature enacted this and just kind of stuck it into the broader context. And so there's a little bit of, I would say, ambiguity. And when you construe statutes, the way that the courts would construe them is to try to give every aspect meaning and not nullify the intent. And so the only way I can construe it is that in this case, we would, if successful, be limited to 2 years.
Thank you, follow up good. Thank you for that, Eric. It sounds like a 6 cent, we believe it could raise potentially 17 million a year, 34 million over the 2 years. I would be curious, alluding to your point earlier about whether we could form some sort of queue or something. I guess it'd just be a shame if of these projects we've identified as potential candidates, if we came up with our short list to put on the ballot and it was not necessarily the same list that the citizenry would have liked to have seen. I guess it'd be a shame to miss the opportunity to fund projects that the citizens would have liked to have seen that maybe we didn't have a good enough read on. And so I would be curious, I guess the statute doesn't outline this, but if we can, you know, have a list of projects and this tax would fund the most voted on, you know, the ones that had the most majority support up to the $34 million mark. I don't know if there's any way we can craft language to try to, you know, get citizen input on as many of them as possible. It sucked for us to create a short list and it has very little citizen, you know, approval, but there's other projects that they would have came out in mass in support of, so.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilor. So you raised some really good points. The statute requires that the election be held the same as a bond election. And so if we get the green light from the commissioners and we're able to move forward to craft that language, then we'll work very closely with the county clerk and the county attorney to try to ascertain as best we can what flexibility we have in terms of crafting that language. Some of the points you raised, the statutes are frankly just silent on that. And so it's trying to reconcile portions of the statute that don't reconcile very easily. So I guess short answer is great points, more to come. Should we
Cross that bridge when we get to it? Okay, thank you.
Mr. City, did you have something, Amber?
Yeah, if
Okay.
part is related to Kyle, you can go ahead.
I, if it's okay, Your Honor, just to tag on a little bit to the conversation. I think from a practical standpoint, though, from a policy standpoint, you really need to weigh in your mind what it is that you would like to see by way of balancing the amount of projects that we believe we can get done with regard to the amount of collections that we think we'll receive over that 2-year period of time. Again, from a practical standpoint, what I'd like you to be thinking about is, particularly as we flesh out the list with actual costs associated with them, we believe that that 2-year period of time for Casper voters and Casper citizens will generate some $36 million. And so I would suggest that the appropriate thing would be to create a list that $36 million could accomplish. And that, of course, runs the risk of undersubscribing, if you will, what it is that the voters might pass pursuant to what it is we could potentially collect. But nonetheless, I like that better as an alternative as your manager versus oversubscribing the ballot and facing the circumstance of having too many projects that won't be funded appropriately within that two-year period of time. So something to think about is what I'm trying to say.
You had a
Yeah, another language item for consideration. I wonder if there's any opportunity for us to also give, you know, in addition to an estimate of how much the project would cost, an estimate of how long that would take to raise. When I think about $36 million over 2 years, I think about a project like the Second Street of Ice. If we've got a gap of $5,000 on funding there, that's 3 months worth of a 6-cent tax to get us over the finish line there, which to me seems remarkable for a project that is otherwise a big question mark for us. Like, how long will it take us to actually be able to complete that project? So when you think about, you know, for the community, we could potentially have funding in hand for that in as long as 3 months. To me, that seems information worth having and worth getting to the voters. And I don't know if it's possible to include something like that on the ballot, because $5 million is a little bit abstract, but understanding that it's just, you know, 3 months to me feels a little more tangible and something that is easier to conceptualize, or whether that's just a, you know, an education item that has to happen outside of the ballot. But certainly being able to provide that information to voters seems useful to me.
Any other questions from council? I am assuming too, and this would probably be a question for Eric, that if we went ahead and put together the list of projects that would total the 36, 35, whatever. But we only get approvals on 3 of them, then actually the tax wouldn't even run the full 2 years. It would end then whenever the funds are collected. Is that a
Mr.
true
Mayor,
statement as
that
well?
is correct. It's the same mechanism that's on the countywide specific purpose tax that once that amount is collected, the city would notify the county and then that tax would cease.
Very good. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear and we understood that as well. Any other questions or comments? Looks like we will go to county commission next week and see if we can get a yes.
Thank you.
And we will discuss then what we're going to do on the 25th for projects.
Yes. If it passes, right.
Yes, very good. Sole source purchase for the gear on the lift.
Mr. Mayor, we wanted to bring this to your attention for a couple reasons. Number one, it's not unusual for us to talk to you about a sole source request on items that we run into from time to time, particularly if they're more sizable than normal. But the real reason that we wanted to bring this to your attention was to get a little exposure to the notion that that we are working diligently to replace the worn out part that hampered the operation of our lift at the very end of the ski season this past season. So that the public would know, you know, by the time we get the season operating again, we should have a real good shot at making sure the lift does not have the same problem again. So if it pleases the council, I'd like to turn some time over to Zelima to walk us through some of that detail and allow you the opportunity to ask any questions.
Ms. Lopez.
Mayor, councilors, good evening. So as the city manager indicated, the real purpose of this evening is to get your hopefully approval to do a sole source procurement for a cone drive that is needed to enhance the operation of the lift. As you know, about a week before we were scheduled to close for the season, we did have a failure. The failure was actually on the bull wheel. It was not on the cone drive. However, the cone drive was a scheduled 5-year capital enhancement, I believe in FY 26 or 27. And because we have to rig the cable to bring down the bull wheel, it makes good economic sense for us to do the cone drive at the same time. We can take advantage of that same rigging and get both projects done for a less cost by combining those efforts. And we feel like this will give us very safe, reliable operation of the lift for several years, giving us time to work on a strategy for funding a new lift at the facility. So essentially that's the request. That's the reasoning behind doing the cone drive now. And you'll see it's just over $41,000 procurement. And then we will come forward with a professional services agreement in the future for the company that will actually be doing the rigging work as well as the installation work. The bull wheel itself will be repaired internally by some of our fleet mechanics and Hope on staff.
Questions from anybody? Kyle?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Zelima, for the extra context. In regards to it being a sole source procurement, it sounds like you provided some information that this provider is the only one capable of providing the parts. And so my guess is rather than putting it out for bid, that process takes, a long time. We're looking to sole source it because they're the only one that can provide it and because we're looking to get this work done before the next year. Is that?
Mayor, councilor, yes, that's absolutely right. There is no other manufacturer that manufactures this particular part any longer. Just demonstrating the importance of replacing the lift because its age is making it increasingly difficult for us to get parts to replace worn out parts or upgrade the lift at all. So, but yes, right now this is our only option to procure that component.
And if I read your memo correctly, we were lucky to be able to find the company that still has the mold to be able to cast it. Otherwise, we would really be up the hill or down the hill with no way to get back up. So, very good. Appreciate all of your diligence.
But just like,
Oh,
say something. I just want to say, from somebody who understands where you're coming from completely with old equipment and trying to find parts that no longer are made, I would suggest highly that we take that opportunity and get it done while you can, because those sources are limited continuously, and buy extra if you need to, but since it's gonna go on, I've learned that the hard way too, is now when I do find them, I buy several so that I have those for replacements in the future. However, with hopefully it getting on as a quad lift and an upgrade to the whole system later on, then, or let's get it done so that season can open up and people, otherwise that'll be a big letdown, especially when we're just seeing that uptick of going so well with night skiing and everything else. I think it's important.
everybody okay with the sole source? Let's have it next week.
12 weeks.
Do what?
12 weeks.
The formal recommendation will come to
Oh,
council.
gotcha.
Yeah, it's 12 weeks from placement of
Yeah.
order. So if we approve it a week from tonight, a week from tomorrow, they
Yeah.
can put it on order. And then our 12 weeks start.
Yeah.
You bet. Thank you, Selima.
Yeah.
Guess the next thing then is the agenda review. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you all know, I will be referring these comments from the grid document that you should all have a copy of. The biggest item coming up here very, very soon is the formal adoption of the fiscal year 25 budget. The public hearing will be next week, as well as the possibility to pass the associated resolution. And then, of course, everything else is stuff that we've talked about or you've seen and or otherwise it's fairly mundane. The meeting of the 25th, however, if you'll look at that for a second, that is the meeting that we would propose a 6-cent conversation be had again, if indeed the county commissioners approve the proposal that you'll be bringing forward next week. And then, as you can see, we've got a number of other things that we need to talk about as well. The advanced Casper EDJPB conversation is critical because not only do you get the opportunity to get an update from Mr. Farley as it relates to the activities of advanced Casper, but this too could serve as a kickoff, if you will, to the formal deliberation process that council needs to go through to eventually, potentially, renew the agreement with Advanced Casper. Believe it or not, we're at the end of that. I think it's a 10-year agreement that was passed a number of years ago. And it behooves this group to give that some deep thought and determine where we want to go with that relationship here in the near future. And beyond that, Mr. Mayor and councilors, I always like to refer to the back page entitled Future Agenda Items to be sure we're not missing out on any items that you would like to see discussed or that we have proposed discussing in the past that for some reason didn't make it to this list. And therefore you need to be our quality control to make sure we're not letting something drop through the cracks. And that is my report.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I assume next would be the legislative review. So if you would like to continue on.
I sure could, absolutely. I really want to use this opportunity to report to council about the deliberations that the WAM board went through last week that you were represented in as well. The resolutions that council discussed the week prior moved forward to the board in the fashion that we expected, with just a couple notes that I would bring to your attention now. The two proposals that came from a couple of our sister communities around the state relating to liquor license enhancements were combined, not only for efficiency purposes, but for advocacy reasons as well. And that combined resolution did pass the board's review. The only resolution, in fact, among the battery of resolutions that you all talked about in this gathering, that didn't pass the scrutiny of the board and, by virtue of the resolutions committee process, would be the resolution dedicated to decriminalization of marijuana in Wyoming. And so that formal proposal that Wham would have otherwise forwarded to the legislature will not be happening by virtue of the fact that the board did not get on board, so to speak, with that idea. What I would like to do from here is get those resolutions in your hands when we have sort of a final copy, if you will, from Wham. And then, of course, you can use them for your own reference purposes and so on. The only other thing I would add by way of legislative review for tonight, next week, the community of Casper is going to be a host for a couple really critical committee meetings next week over at the State Building, the Thyra Thompson Building. We plan to have some presence there, both myself, Jill, Investment Advisory Committee, Mr. Nelson here, the chief on a couple matters. We plan to be there in force, so to speak, taking advantage of the proximity that those committees afford this time around, which, as you know, isn't always the case. Usually committee meetings are all over the state. We have the advantage of having them here in Casper. And if any of you would like to be a part of those discussions, let me know. We'll get you pertinent details to make that happen. And that's my report.
Very good. Thank you. And we will go ahead and do council around the table now before we start the executive session. That way, once the real meeting starts, it'll just be executive session and gone. So I think we started with Amber last time. We will start with Brandy this time.
So I just have a couple of things. With Kyle, I do have questions about how the transit purchasing of passes is working now, and I had some questions about single purchases. So could we get that on the 25th work session since the study's supposed to take effect in July? Just read this paper and add a couple of things on it.
Mr. Mayor, we can certainly do whatever it is that council would like. I thought that I heard that some of you would like to see that information in conjunction with the report when it comes out. But again, we can do whatever council would like and have that discussion ahead of the report or in conjunction with it. We will do whatever council tells us to do.
Would you be happy with it in conjunction with?
I don't think I'm super particular, except I do just have a handful of questions that I don't know that I would necessarily want to have a decision in July without the answers. Specifically, how do you buy an individual pass for medical clinics, not just my own? And also, it looks like we were talking about moving to monthly passes for almost everyone, was my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong there. But the feasibility study leads me to believe that that's our least utilized. So I just have questions. If you guys want to wait, I'm not going to throw down by that, but it did seem to me that maybe I would have a lot more questions before I was ready to say, oh yeah, that sounds like a great plan for the final.
How many want to have it before? Oh, go.
Thank you, Mayor. So in our memo, Carter, it says that the transit fare study will be presented for our review and approval in July. Is there any pressure for us to approve? Are we working against a deadline, or if we decide we need some extra time before we approve it after our review, do we have that flexibility?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor, I would say you absolutely have that flexibility, yes.
I would assume, which that can be a bad thing to do, but we would wind up having a presentation just like this at the work session. And then at that time, we could go ahead and discuss and then decide whether we wanted it for approval on our next meeting or if we needed to have another work session.
Correct. With the only caveat that I would add is I do not expect a study of this magnitude, or excuse me, a presentation of this magnitude to take place during that work session, but rather, hey, here's our recommendations. And what questions do you have?
Basically, here's the executive summary.
Yep,
Go from there.
absolutely. Absolutely.
As long as it's not it's time to vote and decide, I don't care when.
Oh, okay. No, we will plan on all of this at a work session that we will get it. We can look at it.
Session in July.
Yeah.
I think the next thing you have, I just want to make it official. So because we're tabling the Trona County Public Health, can we make sure that that is on the 25th? So I don't have Anna come again, just in case we had questions. She was here. Oh, and I asked her to bring these explanation at that next session that didn't happen.
Okay,
That's it.
very good. Fine.
Oh, is that on the 25th? I'm sorry. Health Department 25th for sure.
The answer I would offer is absolutely, unless you tell me otherwise. Yeah.
25th is fine. Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Casper Housing Authority had their urban thistle and farm groundbreaking last week. Reminder, it's going to be a farm with garden beds and grow houses, a grocery and market, cafe, job skills training and career center, commercial kitchen, and more. I wasn't able to attend, but I know Councilor Jensen was, so she might be able to speak a little bit more to it because she was at the groundbreaking ceremony. Was in Pinedale most of last week with city manager and the vice mayor. As Carter discussed, all but one of the resolutions that we talked about ended up being passed, short of the one for cannabis decriminalization. It was voted down handily, I'd say by at least half or 2/3 of the body of the delegates that were there. And my read on it was one of the primary factors seemed to be there was a really great breakout session led by a gentleman named Rob Bovet, who's Senior Assistant County Counsel for Washington County in Oregon. He had a presentation that was about several different things, mostly Oregon's recent decriminalization and subsequent recriminalization of hard drugs, but also cannabis decriminalization, medicinal use, and recreational use in Oregon. They've been decriminalized up there since 1973. And unfortunately, he didn't have a whole host of information in his presentation regarding to the impact on just decriminalization in that area the past 50 years. But his advice was to the body was to wait and see how the federal government handles it, considering their recent push for the DEA to reschedule it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So on one hand, it's hard to argue with that logic. It's possible sweeping federal rules completely change the landscape in the next year or two, rendering any changes we might make on a local level moot. I don't believe that's going to happen personally. I just don't have that much faith in the federal government to provide that sort of detailed guidance. And so my opinion is that we still have an obligation to represent the vast majority of our residents who don't want people to end up in jail for small possession of cannabis, 75% again, according to the survey. And 85% of people agree with medicinal. Everyone opposed to it that I spoke to at convention seemed to state they would support medicinal use. They have a lot of hesitation about decriminalization. And so I will be advocating the next go around that we support a resolution around medicinal use of cannabis. And so you'll see that from me, I don't know, 8 months from now, 9 months from now, whenever the appropriate time for that will be. So I'll make sure we keep having that healthy discussion. Other than that, tonight is my wife and I's 8-year anniversary. She's not watching. It's not really her cup of tea, but I'd still like to take the opportunity to thank her for serving me on council. I enjoy it. I get a lot of satisfaction out of it. I do it for what I believe to be genuine purposes and in the betterment of my community, but I shouldn't have to appreciate the choir to y'all. Service comes with great personal sacrifice at times, and so missing important milestones is sometimes a part of that. So I just want to thank my wife for her understanding, and I'm thankful that it seems like our agenda, executive session is always a wild card, but I might even be able to get home and have dinner. So I was not planning on that. So I just wanted to make note just in case we got home late. But it's already only quarter to 6, so it's shaping up to be decent.
I'm trying to make the rodeo.
All right, I'll shut up so we can keep going.
Thank you.
That's all I got.
Jai, you would be next.
Thanks, Steve. I actually don't have anything tonight. I've got some meetings next week, but I can talk about that next Tuesday. So I'll keep mine short and sweet so Kyle can go home and celebrate his anniversary. You're welcome.
There you go. I will bypass you and catch you right before me at the end. We'll go to Amber.
Okay, I haven't had any, meetings to report back to you on between now and the last meeting, but I did want to, give a shout out to the LGBTQ advisory, council that participated in Casper Pride this weekend and invite everybody out tomorrow at Washington Park. Park opens at 4:30 and the conversation kicks off at 5:30. And the folks who have filed to run for city council, those who can show up will be entertaining questions and participating in a debate hosted. It's called Politics of the Park, and it's happening, I believe, every Wednesday between now and the election for a variety of offices. But city council's up first, I think. So
Ward 1 specifically,
Ward 1, yeah. So
2 and 3 next week.
so come and learn about the candidates who have filed.
Michael.
Thank you, Steve. So I apologize for being a little bit late. So I don't know if this was covered in the meeting follow-up, but did you get an opportunity to talk about the process? I just felt like it was a little cumbersome last time when we had the public comment and then our reactions to it. Do we have that clarified as far as questions, and do we comment immediately following the comments, or do we wait till all comments are finished? How, can you clarify how that works?
We will try to answer very briefly.
Okay.
Their concern. We should not, as we did last week, we wound up getting into some of our philosophies. We aren't necessarily interested in that. This should be a very, if you need a detailed point to ask, or you can refer it to, but we don't need to be going into 5 and 10 minute discussions. It should be a very quick and concise yay, nay, or referral to type of a situation, so that they know then that it is being referred to somebody in staff, or if we happen to know the answer specifically from something in here. But
Or to ask them clarifying questions?
exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
okay,
Mhm.
all right, thank you. Other than that, I attended Pride Fest last weekend. There's a couple of great art exhibits, coming up this week. Well, at the Nicholas, and there's a great Harry Jackson exhibit. If you're not familiar with, I didn't know much about Harry Jackson, but he actually lived in Cody, most all of his collection. He was a pretty phenomenal individual. He was a contemporary of Jackson Pollock's and so forth, but anyways, war veteran and so forth, who became a painter. But there's an amazing exhibit at the Nick now in the main gallery. There's also Art of Pride exhibit that opens this Tuesday, I believe. And I have a P&Z meeting on Thursday that I'll tell you about next time. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I need to come back to you, Amber?
Yeah, I think Kyle and I, at least, he had his hand up over there too, had a different understanding of the discussion when we voted to change how the meeting goes around. So my understanding was that in between speakers, we could ask clarifying questions, but at the end, during council comments, we could give our reaction or response to the public comments. So I don't think it's clear yet how we are doing it. Yeah.
Okay.
No, at the council comments, after public comment. So my understanding was that we had kind of bifurcated the public comment. Well, there's public comment, and during public comment, while public comment is open, there would be very little back and forth, just clarifying questions. But after public comment has closed, we would have a chance to give reactions and comments.
That was my understanding.
Yep, Mr. Councilors, I do think that's the way the resolution was amended. And so the intent would be that it would be just clarifying questions in between speakers, not engaging in a back and forth or a debate. And then once the public comment period was closed, then councilors would have the opportunity to respond back. So, yeah, I mean, it was more in depth, I think, than normal, and that's what maybe made it seem a little bit, but I think that is the intent.
Very good. That's what we will make sure we do.
Mr. Mayor, I think if you would look next time at the script agenda, the language to make sure that that is clear in your minds. Or if it needs some amending as well, albeit I'm not suggesting amending resolution again or anything like that. I just want to be sure that the script agenda language makes sense and gets to the heart of what we think we understand about the process.
I will try to get with you between now and then and we'll get that ironed out so I understand. I understand what you're putting in there so that I get it all taken care of.
Thank you.
Very good. And while we're talking about script, I know we say it before public comment about no duplication, yada, da, da, da. When we were talking about only doing that type of a deal once before,
Public hearing.
public hearings. Thank you. Are we gonna do that again right before public hearings, or are we planning on using that one time to take care of all of it?
Mr. Mayor, I believe that we can do, when you're in the circumstance of having multiple public hearings, one after the other, you have the authority, in my opinion, to say, hey, we're about to have 3 public hearings.
Okay,
Here's the rules for the public hearings, and read them through once,
very good.
and you should be good to go.
Because I noticed we have, I think, 5 next time. So right before we start the public hearings, if you could stick that in there, I would appreciate that. Very good. Because I didn't notice it last time. I go, oh, golly. So very good. Thank you. We're down to Jeff.
My
Thank you.
turn.
Yes.
No, so like Kyle mentioned, I did go to the Urban Thistle groundbreaking over in Mills, and it's gonna be a spectacular project. They had the design plan of what they're doing, and it's gonna be an amazing facility and a part of town that it'll be utilized. And so there's lots of indoor, like, what do they call them? Geo greenhouses. And so there's gonna be a few of those, and then outside, there's gonna be outdoor gardens and some entertaining space and everything from growing to processing. And so there's everything in between as far as education opportunities and things too for the public. So it's gonna be amazing. Be fun to watch it develop. So, and then I wanted just to let everybody know, I'm gonna have to be virtual next week. I'm gonna go visit my daddy in Nevada for Father's Day. So I haven't seen him in a couple of years, so gonna head back that way. So virtual is where I'll be. And it's CNFR week. So I just wanna, there's a lot of CTAs. I think, what did we say? There's 10,000 CTAs or something crazy. There's like a huge amount of them. And so just reminding everybody to get your CTA smiles on and be great entertainers and resources for all of those tourists that are here in town, and send them downtown, send them to all the different places that we have here in Casper, and be patient. I know that there's a lot of construction and a lot of long waits, especially at that intersection going on to Wyoming Boulevard from the fairgrounds area where their livestock is. But be patient, be kind, remember that, we are a great city and we want them to continue being here. It's 25 years and it's a blessing to have them come here and make such a great appearance, and we get a lot of people in. So enjoy CNFR. It's off to a great start, I think, and that's what I got. You can talk more about it, Mr. Board Member of CNFR.
Thank you for the plug, Jenna.
Yeah.
Ms. Vice Mayor.
I had gone to WHAM last week and Kyle pretty much covered all of that. And then I just wanted to do a shout out to the police officers. Jake Bigelow, Jason Whitler, and Jack Fetter. They all just got recently promoted for sergeant, and Josh Albrecht and Tony Stadelli for lieutenant. And then we have some changeovers that's in going to go for the metro. So I'd just like to say congratulations to all of those officers. And that's all I've got.
You stole my thunder, but thank you. I was going to go over that as well. That is wonderful that our police officers are doing well, and that's an indication that basically they're on top of their game. It looks like the chief has something to say along those lines.
Mayor, if I may, I just want to clarify, we had an assessment. The people that you just identified passed the assessment, but they've not been promoted yet. We're awaiting those opportunities, those vacancies to appear, so
Oh,
they just passed the assessment.
well, congratulations to them for passing their assessments.
I agree. It's a brutal assessment. It's 2 solid days of just absolutely mind-numbing, stressful time. So the fact that they passed it and all of our applicants passed it does speak very well as to the quality of the people that you have working in the police department.
Thank you.
Thank you, chief. Yeah. Basically, as was stated, this is CNFR week. Tomorrow, the city will be declaring the Coach of the Year proclamation at the rodeo. I'm not going to announce it tonight. That will be for tomorrow night. So, but we will be proclaiming tomorrow that gentleman's name as Coach of the Year at the rodeo. Thursday night is government night. I need to visit with you all very briefly about who's got tickets, who was needing them. I think I was supposed to get them for 3 people, and I have those tickets tonight. But yes, get out to the rodeo, enjoy the rodeo. If you're planning on coming Friday or Saturday night, you better get with the program now, because I'm not sure how many tickets are left, because it's getting close. Season ticket sales were up, individual ticket sales were up. And I know last year, I think we missed a sellout on Saturday night by what, a couple of hundred tickets maybe? We sold out. Okay, so basically we are on that agenda. So if they still have any, you better get them now. Beyond that, they are going to be the grand opening for the BLM air tanker base this Friday at the airport. I will be attending
I'll be
that.
there.
So that is this Friday. So we will be having air tankers here throughout the summer for wildfire season. Beyond that, I don't think they have anything else along those lines. However, yeah, notice was given, and we will now I now call the June 11th, 2024 special council meeting to order.
We need to adjourn. We just need to adjourn.
There is no adjournment to a work session per se. Is there?
So I think calling to order though for the special meeting is certainly appropriate.
Yes. Do what?
Then we adjourn into executive session for the special
Yes.
meeting.
I now call the June 11th, 2024 special council meeting to order. The council will entertain a motion to by minute action excuse the absence of Councilor Pacheco.
So moved.
Second.
Coin toss.
And who did the Amber? Okay. Any abstentions or nay votes? All voting aye?
Aye.
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 Please record, the motion passes. Please record the vote.
With all counselors voting aye, the motion passes.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What are you wanting?
A notice of an executive session to take place at this date and during this meeting was given. We have matters to discuss regarding land and litigation. Therefore, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session, and at the conclusion of that executive session, to reconvene this special meeting solely for purposes of adjournment of this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
I know who was second. I heard a second from over there. Randy had already got one. You want it again? Okay. There are a majority of members present, and a motion to adjourn into an executive session has been moved and seconded. This motion requires a 2/3 majority of council present. Any abstentions or nay votes? All voting aye?
Aye.
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 Guy?
Sorry, aye.
Thank you. Please record the vote.
All counselors voting aye, the motion passes.
A greater than 2/3 majority of council present voted in favor of the motion. We are hereby adjourned into an executive session.